I spoke to one comedian, and he said he was quoting someone else, but he said the joke that will destroy my career is already out there.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the world gained a huge amount by suddenly being able to communicate with each other in 280 characters or less, you know. I think as an experiment, the results are in, and we know that that doesn't really help us talk to each other, you know. I know this is a headline you see all the time from people, so it's a cliche to say it, but there is no way that Father Ted would be written today. When
Come here, Graham. Thanks very much for joining me. I appreciate the time. I've been speaking now for a while. Can you give us a bit of an idea? I'm sure the Irish people probably know you, but I have a few American listeners. Can you give us an idea of kind of how you came to prominence?
Sure. My name is Graham Linehan. I started off as a music journalist in Ireland on Hot Press magazine. Then I went on to write comedy in the UK with Arthur Matthews, mainly on the shows Father Ted, Paris. Then I did a few of my own, Black Books, IT Crowd, things like that. Count Arthur Strong, and then I was kind of cancelled when I started standing up for women's rights and getting involved in the debate around trans issues.
I see. What's like? We'll get into like your writing and upbringing and what's going on now. But what's life like for you at the moment? If you can give us a quick kind of view into it.
Well, it's essentially all activism. I mean, one of my problems is that I'm maybe maybe there's one other person, but maybe the only person in, I guess, the celebrity world who's been trying to bring attention to this, to things like women being attacked at meetings and silenced, and children being put on a medical pathway with experimental drugs. You know, when I started all this, I thought it would only be a matter of time before all my colleagues kind of joined in and realized, oh my God, this is terrible. but it's been about 6 years and I'm still waiting for someone to turn up. So my day is just busy. Basically, every day I get about, I'd say the average is about one a day, because sometimes I get two, you know, and then one day I'll get a flurry. But like basically whistleblowers in all parts of society talking about how they're being forced to use, you know, preferred, or how they're being forced to use pronouns at work, how they're how unscientific language is creeping into various things. I met one therapist told me, and this is one of the things that sticks with me. She said that she has young girls coming into her in tears because they think that J.K. Rowling wants to kill them. And she can't tell them that it's not true, because if she did, they might report her to her accreditation body. So it's a situation of just sheer insanity and fear, and yeah, I'm still just trying to get people to pay attention to it. You know?
Okay, cool. We'll get into more of that later on, but we'll
Sure.
kind of go back to the beginning with you. What was your growing up like? School, etc. I know obviously Father Ted is very you know, it very much takes the piss out of the Catholic Church and so on. So like, yeah, what was
Yeah.
what was the relationship like growing up with the church?
It was fine, you know. I went to a Marist Fathers school, CUS, on Leeson Street, where they were, you know, they were fine. They never bothered me too much. My real kind of problem was my schoolmates, you know, because I was bullied a lot, you know. But but the priests were all good. There was a few eccentric ones, which might have fed into Ted a little bit. But I think the thing that really fed into Ted was the fact that they didn't really mistreat me, you know. And so when the time came to put the boot in, we only put it in with a kind of clown shoe, you know.
Right. This is sort of a big topic. But we'll only go into it briefly. Do you have any kind of thoughts on on why Catholicism has declined so much in Ireland? I mean, I think it's fair to say that, I mean, my grandparents' generation, I think they're pretty much the only ones that kind of still go to mass. And I know people get their kids like confirmed and stuff, but that's kind of something you just do through school.
Sure.
Would you agree? Would you agree that there has been a decline to the point where it's almost dead?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I really don't, I haven't been back to Ireland in a while. I couldn't tell. I mean, I've come a long way over the last few years, and one of the things I realized is that I do think there is a value to some form of not so much religious observance, but community and people gathering together and everyone reminding each other of our common humanity. I think that something's gone now. It's basically religion is gone, and it's not been replaced by anything except, in one particular case, the trans issue, a kind of pseudo religion, and yeah, I think it's dangerous. I think we've all got that God-shaped hole in our hearts, and it's being filled with stuff that's not really satisfying to us and is not really helping us. But then again, that's not to say that, I mean, obviously Ireland's relationship to the church was a really corrosive and ugly one. It wasn't a good relationship for years, but we lanced that boil, and all the evil came out, and I feel like now it's a time to look back and say, well, what babies did we throw out with the bathwater? And one of them is, sense of community, and also a sense of just basic morality. I don't know whether you saw it, but in New Zealand, the 70-year-old woman being beaten up by a young man at one of Posey Parker's protests. It's there's a kind of a forgetting of basic ethics, like things, very, very simple things, like you don't attack old women. You don't. Do you know what I mean? You don't send nasty tweets to severely disabled women. And all of these things have been kind of forgotten. They're you see behavior of certain people online, and it just blows you away at the sheer violence of the way they speak to women, and older women.
I was going to say, if you're not meeting people in person quite so much, and without the community aspect, it's easy to just view people as what you see of them online. And it's, if someone's like tweets a lot about like trans issues, it's very easy to just see them as kind of as that person.
Sure.
Instead of, like, if you meet someone in person, you might discover that they have an opinion different to yours, but it's fine because you've had like a good interaction with them, and you realize, okay, they're not isn't a bad person just because they hold an opinion that I might think is bad.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the world gained a huge amount by suddenly being able to communicate with each other in 280 characters or less. I think as an experiment, the results are in, and we know that doesn't really help us talk to each other. I don't know. Yeah, there's just a kind of a distance that people have when they're online. I could be guilty of it too. My thing is, as I say, I used to be a music journalist, and I remember writing. I once wrote a film review. Actually, I was a film critic for Hot Press and then for Select Magazine in the UK. And I once wrote a review for a film. I was so exhausted by watching bad movies that I once wrote a one-word review of a film that just said shit. And I did it to elicit a laugh and to get people laughing and stuff like this. But it's that kind of humor, and it's that kind of I guess attitude that kind of made going online very frictionless for me. I kind of was able to kind of excel online because when you have a few minutes to think, everyone can be funny. So you look like you're actually really just a sharp, witty person, but of course you're reading something and going away and thinking about it and going online and looking up quotes, then coming back with your killer comeback. But yeah, overall, I just think that there has been a coarsening and a deadening of conversation and of compassion, and it's just been you know, as I say, I think the results are in, and the results aren't great. I think basically the current insanity that we're all going through, it could not have happened without Twitter. You know, I genuinely think there's this sort of a kind of electronically transmitted viral bit of kind of mass delusion going on at the moment. You know, it can like, but I don't want to go too quickly into all the trans stuff because otherwise I'd be talking about it too much, and I know you want to go wider than that. But yeah, I think to return to your original question, yes, I do think we've lost something. I wouldn't like to see Ireland go back to where we were, but you know, well, you know, there's something I can't tell you, unfortunately, because it would ruin a bit of Father Ted the musical, which may never be seen anyway. But I one of the things we did with the musical was it was coming out of COVID, so we wanted to make sure that everybody, it almost felt, oh, I can't tell you, it'll give it away,
Fair enough.
But basically, I just think that there's a civilizing aspect to being part of an audience, which is really what a church congregation is. I think it's reassuring and civilizing, and we see each other's empathy in each other's faces. As you say, when you're talking to each other, you get a much more round version of the person. And yeah, it's been atomized and blown up, and now we've all been kind of, you know, we're all in our separate little universes, you know, which have a kind of reality to them. That's every time we open up our laptop, that's very different to the reality in everyday life. Yeah, and I think it's just having all sorts of effects on different people in different ways, you know. The worst thing I think is pornography. I think pornography, I used to be a great believer in pornography. I used to think pornography was something that would keep the men off the street and where they'd stop bothering the women, you know. They'd like, I don't know whether you've seen the film, what's it called? Oh, I can't remember. What's it called?
Don John?
No, there's a film, Ben Stiller, the one with Ben Stiller.
The one where he gets the stuff in his
yeah,
ear.
yeah, and that
it's
whole
called There's Something About Mary.
There's Something About Mary. The whole comic sequence there that led to that bit is because someone says to him, masturbate before you go out, and then you won't be full of your usual male, you know, enthusiasm, shall we say.
You're relaxed a bit, yeah.
Yeah, you're relaxed a bit when you're meeting a woman. So he does it. So the thing is, that's what I thought pornography would do. I thought pornography would take out some of that poison in men's personality and direct it somewhere else, somewhere where it wouldn't hurt anyone. But the more you find out about pornography, the more you find out that there's really very few people who aren't victims in that world. And also it just didn't turn out to be true. Instead of kind of draining a boil, sorry, the second time I used that image, but instead of doing that, pornography kind of just became the culture. I don't know if you feel this way, but I just don't think we have culture at the moment. I think we have a kind of pornified culture that is really grim and alien to people's experiences of life. Like,
sorry, do you mean I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mean like it's kind of seeped into normal things, like on music videos?
Yes.
Music videos are pretty much soft porn at this stage. And
well, soft porn is one thing, right? There was every music video when I was growing up was soft, from Robert Palmer doing "Addicted to Love" up. But now what you have is Sam Smith miming someone urinating in his mouth, you know, and that's a huge step, you know. That's like that's a celebration of pornography, and that's a celebration of certain types of pornography that, you know, some people could have gone their whole lives without finding out about it. But now you're potentially having to explain it to your kid who's a Sam Smith fan, you know. So it's like there's, I just think, and also I think that it's not just that, it's if you notice all the kind, again, I don't want to go too early into the trans stuff, but the trans kind of movement is you know, it's linked to pornography, and and it's linked to the idea of transgression in a number of really disturbing ways, you know. Do you want to hear a little example of that?
Sure, you're going.
Okay, well, the supposedly the biggest health organization in the US and supposedly the world standard for trans health is WPATH. And WPATH, among all their resources on their website, they link to a website called the Eunuch Archives. Now, this is the kind of thing I'm going to tell you, and you will not believe it's true, because it is so grotesque. And we've been reporting on it for months without any pickup. But basically, the Eunuch Archives is almost entirely a repository of short stories about cutting your dick off, right? Which is kind of bad enough. They're all like supposedly erotic stories about castration. This is WPATH, who are supposed to be the leaders of trans health. 40% of the stories are tagged minor. So 40% of the stories on this website that's officially linked to by supposedly the world leader in trans health is child pornography about young boys being castrated. So there's a kind of so the Overton window is moving to such an extent that this is all happening in plain sight, and that's what I mean when I say pornography is kind of trickling down, you know. So I just think there has to be, people have forgotten that there is a natural level of outrage that you can have that exists outside religion and exists outside you know, old-fashioned views on what's appropriate. You know, there's just certain things that should be sacrosanct. One is, you know, children are not involved in adult sexuality in any way, and here's WPATH promoting it. So it's yeah, it's kind of a frightening thing in many ways.
Growing up, were you the type who was okay with holding or expressing an opinion that could kind of get you into a little bit of trouble? I was going to say about the trans thing, a controversial opinion, but then I always have to remind myself that most people actually agree with your position. They're just kind of too scared to say anything, or they might not feel like they're educated enough on it to be able to speak intelligently.
That's a very fair point. Yes, I think that's very true. It's a difficult subject to grasp, and part of the reason that it is so difficult is because the language is so deliberately confusing. You know, you often hear someone saying the word trans man, thinking it refers to a man who identifies as a woman, and then when you tell them actually no, a trans man is a woman, they lose interest and they give up because it's already so confusing. And that's what happens with the whole of the language around it. But anyway, to answer your question, growing up, yeah, I was always as soon as, like, I was about, I can't remember how old I was, but after years of feeling guilty because of, you know, masturbation and stuff like that, I happened to open a World Book encyclopedia that my parents had bought, and it was the Parents' Guide. And an inspiration just struck me, and I looked up masturbation in the back, in the index, you know, and all it said was perfectly fine, nothing to worry about. Something like that. It was like that simple, perfectly normal, nothing to worry about. And in that instant, I stopped believing in God, because I had months or years of terrible guilt, thinking I was doing the worst thing in the world, thinking that was, because, you know, sex is so very, very nice, you know, that you just think, wow, this is so good. Like if you were a good Catholic like I was, you thought this was so good, there must be an equivalent punishment, right? So every time you had an orgasm, you were like, ah, this is great. So you know, that guilt kind of lingered until I saw that, and then as soon as I saw that, everything flipped, and combined with the books I was reading Vonnegut and Woody Allen and David John Irving and all these, and Milan Kundera and all these different people, the combination of realizing that I'd been completely fooled for years and years and years, fooled into being guilty. Plus the influence of all these, you know, very smart thinkers, just made me question everything, you know. And I started doing it with the priests in school, got into a bit of trouble about that. And then, you know, I just continued to do it all along the way. You know, the thing that I did wrong in my life was I trusted some of my sources and influences too much. You know, I didn't realize that the left in in the West had just started to go insane. And for years I was kind of running alongside the mob, thinking, oh yeah, Nigel Farage, plane crash, great, hope he dies, that type of stuff, you know, a kind of a very uh you might call it a kind of a burning sense of righteous justice, you know, that was kind of engendered on the internet, because the language used would always be actually I could make the sound much better on this, sorry about this. Will that screw things up if the sound is suddenly a lot better?
No, it's fine. You're grand. You're grand.
Okay. Sorry, where was I? Just saying about
you were at one stage you were kind of running alongside like some left mobs.
Yeah. And I didn't realize that there were things like the hyperbolic language being used was bullshit. You know, it's like you often see it. You have to see, oh, he literally wants refugees to die, or he literally wants this, and it was all this kind of catastrophizing language, and that, you know, I was pulled into it. I remember when Trump won and when Brexit went through, I, like a lot of other left-wing people, you know, went into a panic. You know, there was a feeling that the Nazis were about to walk down the street, you know, and I responded online by you know, starting to kind of be that pugilistic person, you know, getting into rows with right-wing guys, because I thought they were evil. I thought the right was evil, you know, and it was only because I was just unfortunately heavily influenced by the kind of fire and brimstone language that left-wing activists brought to the internet, you know. So I allowed myself to be too pulled in by that, and then when it turned on me, I was extremely surprised, because I thought I was saying very mild things, you know, like when I started saying, you know, talking about the whole trans women are women thing, I was trying to be very specific. I was trying to tell people, you know, I'm not talking about transsexuals. I'm you know, transsexuals is a very different thing, but these are people who are not getting any thing. They're putting black fingernail polish on and thinking they can go into the ladies, you know. And I'm not exaggerating. I've seen many examples of that type of thing. And I thought, you got to draw a distinction between transsexuals who've been through the ringer and a bunch of people who've decided that, you know, because they sometimes get aroused while looking at, I don't know, pictures of geese, then they're somehow a new type of person. Sorry, that was a very bad explanation, but like
I get, yeah, no, you're fine.
Yeah. I guess what I mean is there's a feeling that, oh, my special internal personal feelings, they were basically people were just basically being told you're trans when you have these and it's basically just your personality. Like, for instance, there was a very revealing slide that the group Mermaids showed, and it was photographed, because you can't take photographs in their meetings because they keep them secret. But someone managed to find a photograph of it, and it was a list of reasons why your child might be transgender, or a list of things that might show you that your child would be transgender. And the list was things like moody, right? Yeah, finds it difficult to concentrate at school.
Imagine a teenager being moody. Go.
Exactly. And a lot of the traits on the list were autistic traits, right? So, you know, we found out recently that the Tavistock, there was the mass misdiagnosis of autistic and gay kids at the Tavistock is entirely down to this expansion of the word trans to mean anything anyone wants it to mean. And it's enormously dangerous, because you know, some people, like someone like, there's a guy, very famous guy, his name is Alex Drummond, and he calls himself a woman, but he's got a full beard, and he sits on the trans advisory board at Stonewall. You know, like all he's done is grown a beard. Sorry, no, let me rephrase that. He hasn't done anything. He already had a beard, and he put on a dress, and now he says he's not only a woman but a lesbian. And I immediately realized that was the most homophobic thing you could possibly say. It was absolutely disgracefully homophobic thing, and yet somehow it got through. And he, you know, you will be cancelled if you criticize him, as indeed I was. You know, but this man is making a mockery of the lesbian experience. So I just, sorry, I can't remember what was the original question that got us here. Anyway, yeah, I don't remember the question that got us here. But basically, I realized that there were certain people, yeah, and then there were people on my side, like Debbie Hayden, who's a trans woman, who has actually had the operation, because Debbie says that the moment Debbie was online, and the moment Debbie found out that you could cut your penis off, you could have this operation, and you would be considered a woman, this is what he was told, he went and he did it. He said he couldn't stop thinking about it. So in the end, he got it done. And, you know, it could have destroyed his family. And he's very honest about it. He's very honest about the fact that his dysphoria created this compulsion in his head, you know? But he doesn't think on any level that it turns him into a woman, or that it has, well, I don't even think he thinks it's helped. I think it basically just, it was a compulsion, and it drove him to it, and he did it. And now he spends all his time writing in defense of feminists and warning people about what these procedures actually mean, and what these drugs actually mean, you know. So someone like Alex Drummond, who has had no surgeries, no drugs, you could, he's definitely, I don't think he's on estrogen or anything like that, who just kind of waltzes in wearing a dress and saying he's expanding the bandwidth of what it means to be a woman, is enormously offensive. And I still don't see why people don't get how offensive that is. It's incredible.
I wanted to ask you, okay, the whole trans issue, it often gets like very far from like the people who it does genuinely affect. Like there is a small percentage of people who genuinely feel like they're born in the wrong body and stuff. What would you say? I don't know if you ever get asked, but like what are your views on that? Do you think if someone does genuinely feel that way, and if you know them in person, that like if they say to you, would you mind calling me she instead of he, or calling me Greta instead of Graham, would that be something you do, like it kind of in your own life?
It would in my personal life. The problem is that unfortunately none of us have a private life anymore. Everything's public, everything's outward facing. You know, so when I'm talking to someone like Debbie, who I really consider my friend, and I value his friendship, I will use male pronouns and speak to him as if he's a male, and he understands this because he knows that currently, you know, women are being gaslit to such an extent that using female pronouns for Debbie is just adding to that. So he's very understanding, you know, he knows exactly where I'm coming from, and he doesn't mind it when I do it. But if we were in private and we were hanging around, or if I was talking about him, you know, to a friend or something like that, yeah, I might slip into using female pronouns. The problem is when you apply a rule like that across the board at all levels of society, that's when it becomes impossible. Like there's apparently Foucault, is that how you pronounce his name? He was like the academic who gave rise to a lot of queer theory.
Michel Foucault?
Michel Foucault, yeah, that's how you pronounce it, sorry. Foucault, apparently he one of the things, and I may be explaining this badly, but I think it's roughly the right way to think of it, but Foucault used to take the example of a village fool, and I'm not comparing Debbie to a village fool, but this is a side issue. But he used to say that basically what would happen in a village is there would be a villager who thought they were the mayor or something like that, And the villagers would call him mayor, and they would agree with him and do what he said and blah blah blah. And they would just basically humor him and make his life a little bit easier, because he was a, you know, even though he was kind of he'd lost his mind or whatever it happened to be, he was a valued member of the tribe, of the group. You know, that's fine in a village. You can't apply it across society, because then you get things like male prisoners wanting to get into female prisons, and once you start indulging that type of thing, well, you put the women in danger. You know, so so it's a kind of a thing that I think was probably grew up from people like Foucault, a feeling of, oh, you know, we've got to let people create their own realities, and yeah, it might have worked on a smaller stage, might even have worked pre-internet, you know what I mean, in cities and things like that. But on the internet, it just becomes, because everything's public, you're suddenly saying people are women who aren't women. There's suddenly women who are insulted by that. There's suddenly trans people who are insulted by the women being insulted. It's an absolute mess. And the only thing we're looking for in this, me and people like Posey Parker and all these other people, the only thing we're looking for is just a little bit of clarity, a little, you know, to make sure that when it comes to the important things like rape crisis shelters and prisons and so on and so forth, that these things are protected, you know. And it's a very basic thing. You got to protect vulnerable people, and female prisoners are some of the most vulnerable people in the world. Did you know? Here's an interesting fact someone told me about female prisoners. Again, the numbers are hard, but I think it's 60%. Let's say 50, just in case I'm overguessing or underguessing. Let's say 50%. 50% of women in prison have the evidence of blunt force trauma to the head that was given to them by an ex-partner, or even a partner, well, whoever they were with before they went into prison. That's a huge amount of people who have severe brain damage who are in women's prisons. To put them in with men as an experiment is for me beyond evil, you know. And I again, it's one of those things that I just don't understand why people aren't helping, you know. That's why I'm still on my own after 6 years of fighting this stuff.
Yeah, for me, I do understand how like other comedians and other celebrities and stuff wouldn't want to actually go into like what they think about whether, you know, whether a trans person is the gender they say they are, what. But there's another issue in the more important one, in my opinion, is that it's okay to disagree. It's okay to have an opinion that differs from like the loudest activist. You know, that itself is a separate issue from whatever you think about trans. It creates like this kind of climate of fear around it, and yeah, people just kind of close up, and they'll just kind of learn the answer that they know won't get them into trouble, and that can be like the stock answer that they have, you know.
Yeah, and that's, I do get that, you know, but there's certain things that you can get involved with this fight over without getting into trouble. Like, you know, beating up 7-year-old women isn't a good thing. You know, it's not a good thing to scream and shout at women and not let them speak when they're trying to just, you know, do little speeches to camera. That's all those Standing for Women events are. You know, I'm sure we're all agreed on the urgency of stopping kids from getting experimental drugs that are having effects on them that we don't know, because they didn't do follow-up studies on these kids. You know, these are things that you don't have to go in, you know, knowing your onions to such an extent that you can get into a battle with India Willoughby online. You know, you just have to know enough to make you a basic, decent human being. You know, and when you see women being beaten up, old women, 7-year-old woman in New Zealand, or children, you know, young women in tears because they've had to get a hysterectomy in their 20s, you know, or women in tears because they realize they'll never be able to breastfeed their babies because of what they had done to them when they were 15 years old, when they thought that when all of society was lying to them and telling them that if they cut off their breasts, they'd become a real boy. You know, for me, these are so basic that you don't really need to be schooled in the language. You just need to say, this is right, this is wrong, you know?
And you have to be, I think, arguably more important, you have to be okay with someone calling you one of these very damaging terms, like a transphobe or a bigot, and you have to be okay with being called that, and being able to confidently say, no, I'm not, and you're acting in bad faith for making that claim when you don't have the evidence.
Yeah, and I mean, but it's not just that. What it is like I spoke to one comedian, and he said he was quoting someone else, but he said the joke that will destroy my career is already out there. So it's not so much a question of being okay with being called a bigot. You have to realize that these guys are like, you know, opposition research. You know, when a politician does opposition research on their rival, they will look for anything they can use to destroy that man's chances of winning. And that's what it's like. Basically, as soon as I got into hot water, my entire Twitter feed was searched, which was never a problem when I was saying that Nigel Farage should die in a plane crash. That was all fine, right? But as soon as I started saying what they considered to be the wrong things, you know, there were screen grabs of old tweets I'd made, things just brought out of context, and there was a picture painted of me that was entirely false. That became my Wikipedia entry. My Wikipedia entry is now based on Pink News articles. Pink News have written over 80 hit pieces on me, you know?
And who are Pink News, excuse me?
They're like a kind of an online gay magazine, I guess you call them, but they just exist to push the trans thing. There's nothing really gay about them. It's just a trans thing. They famously wrote 42 stories about J.K. Rowling in a single week. So Rowling's the only person who can beat me for a number of hit pieces, but I've had 80 hit pieces done on me, and they all kind of have formed a picture that is basically my Wikipedia entry. So whenever anyone goes to my Wikipedia entry, the first thing they'll see is a lie, which is that I call trans people Nazis or something like this, which was a Pink News headline. You know, so it's things like that. It's not just a question of getting ready to be called a bully. They will try and destroy your life, like they did me. They said they released my wife's address online. They sent the police to my wife. They sent the police to our house 2 times. We got one phone call, but they threatened my wife. You know, a private detective once turned up to her home when we'd broken up, and she didn't. There's no way the person who sent the private detective could have known her address. You know, we were under siege for a number of years until you know, my wife couldn't bear it, and we had to break up, you know. So the other thing that happened was my brilliant plan was that I had £250,000 from a cancer life insurance payout thingy when I got cancer. I briefly had cancer, you know. So I got £250,000, and I said to my wife, because I knew they'd come after my livelihood, I said, we'll use this to just stay safe until the TED musical comes out. And then, you know, and that was the plan. But unfortunately, COVID happened. So the £250,000 just ran out. And as it ran out, I was getting into more and more trouble because I wouldn't stop speaking about this until finally they told me to walk away from the musical.
Who's they?
Hat-Trick Productions, Jimmy Mulville. And unfortunately, I hate to tell you, but Neil Hannon of the Divine Comedy and Arthur Matthews, they must have okayed it, you know, because like I heard from Jimmy and it was a done deal. You know, they said they wanted a clean break and they wanted to move to, and when I said, okay, you know, I'll walk away, but I do want to come in and see productions and see how it's going from time to time, they said, no, we want a clean break. you know. So I actually, we started working on the on my statement because I needed the money. You know, they offered me 200 grand to walk away, so I started working on my statement. And as I was working on the statement, I heard an interview with the teammate uh, of with the mum of a teammate of Leah Thomas. And Leah Thomas was the swimmer who is a man, is none, you know, no, has had no operation, nothing like that. It's just a huge hulking man who is currently cheating at women's swimming. And yeah, and this teammate, this mother said her kid came into her once and said, if he comes into the changing room, I don't know what I'm allowed to do. And she was in tears because she said, it's 2023 and I have to tell my daughter that she can tell a man to leave a changing room, that she is allowed to do that. It's 2023. And she was really in tears. And that was the moment where I thought, fuck them. I will not take my name off this. I've done nothing wrong. And this is an important issue that needs to be exposed. And that's when they just said, all right, we're not doing it then.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Given that the whole kind of issue and like fights and stuff with activists has, I think to some degree you kind of said that it kind of consumed your life. Do you ever
only because no one was helping. If people had stood up for me, if Arthur Matthews or Neil Hannon had ever made a single statement saying, you know, yes, not just like basically Arthur once said Graham's not a bigot. Well, that's not good enough. You have to say not only is Graham's not a bigot, but children have to be protected and old ladies shouldn't be beaten up. I'm only asking people to make the barest of steps into this debate so that they can say basic things. Arthur used to be very respectful of old people, and now there's an old woman beaten up in New Zealand and he's not a word about her. You know, and people like Panty Bliss threatening the same thing to Posey's followers next month in Dublin. You know, all these people have to do is just a basic bit of morality. Stand up for women. Stand up for their fucking friends. It's really outrageous, the lack of solidarity and you know how lightly they take friendship. It blows me away.
Has this stuff ever, I mean, obviously online, online is where most of it exists, and for you it most certainly percolated into your personal life in that the stress of the whole thing kind of ended up ending your relationship with your wife. But yeah, sorry, has it ever taken like a physical form, like attacked in the street or shouted at or anything like that?
I've had about three or four occasions where that type of thing is. Most of my interactions are with women who are very, very thankful, and you know, it was great actually. I did an interview with the Times, and a woman came up to us while we were doing the interview. It's brilliant to thank me. So you know, most of the time it's great, but essentially what we have at the moment is a sort of tiered reality, right? We have like the real world, which we're all passing through, and you and I are involved in that at the moment, talking to each other. And then we have a number of other different worlds. The online world is one, but also there's the version of reality that Guardian readers are experiencing, you know, where they don't know about the Tavistock. They don't know about the Wee Spa incident in which a man was caught exposing himself to women. Everyone said it was a hoax, and you know, they were all trying to defend this poor trans woman. Turned out to be a wanted sex offender, you know. Whereupon newspapers like The Guardian just dropped the story. So basically The Guardian is deliberately trying to keep its readers informed only to a point, you know. And then you have the tiered reality of what a Fox News viewer might be believing as he watches TV, you know. So we're all believing separate versions of reality, you know. In one version of reality, I'm a transphobic monster, but that version only exists among politics, you know. like the anyone who follows me or reads what I write about the subject knows exactly where I stand on this issue. It's a completely normal, compassionate, almost middle of the road take on the whole thing, you know. But that's not how it's presented, because you have people like Wikipedia and people like Pink News and the people who amplify all these things working together to paint a picture of me that's completely fake. So when I walk down the street, it is a bit nerve-wracking because you don't know what version of me someone is going to approach you with.
Right. How do you feel? It's funny. I did some quick. I did some Googling, obviously in preparation for this. First thing that comes up on the Wikipedia, anti-trans activist.
Yeah.
Do you know? I was going to ask you about that. Yeah. Is there any kind of like? Is there any applying you can do to them? Nothing like that.
I don't know what it, but basically, famously, Wikipedia has been controlled by trans rights activists for a number of years. Like, for instance, Eilish O'Hanlon, her entry started. Eilish O'Hanlon is a TERF. You've seen this in a dictionary definition of someone, you know. You know, Wikipedia, basically my solicitors monitored it and they tried to change things like anti-trans to pro-women's rights, and it would revert back within 15 minutes every time. So there's either it's either on a watch list of pages, or there are actual moderators keeping an eye on it and making sure it doesn't revert. So it's you know, what can you do? Like the kind of forces up against me are so huge that the only way I can fight them is by just continually doing interviews like this, continually speaking to people, trying to get what's happening to me across. But it rarely seems to break through, you know. It rarely seems to break through. People still have this view of me, you know.
We spoke a bit about support. I suppose lack of support from comedians. You would really think like if there's any job that requires you to be able to speak your mind on kind of whatever topic you feel like it, and have it be understood that when you're performing comedy, when you're writing comedy for a show, when you're up on stage, to use to use that kind of the kind of language of a lot of those the left people, it's actually kind of a safe space, you know. It's somewhere where you should where you should be able to kind of say whatever you want, and it's understood that it's in comedy. So yeah, what's it like seeing comedians that kind of go against their own interests like that?
There's different people at different levels. Like, for instance, like if you're a jobbing working comedian who's doing the clubs and stuff, I think, you know, you're audience facing, so you do have to be a little bit careful. I understand that they have to protect themselves, but there's other comedians, there's name comedians who have no excuse for not knowing about this issue. I'll give you an example. Kathy Burke. James Dreyfus was in a sitcom with Kathy Burke. Now, James was in our first sitcom, Paris. This is a reason I think Arthur should be fighting this, but isn't. But he was in our first sitcom, Paris, and 5 years ago, me and James signed a letter to Stonewall asking them to try and create the ground for a less toxic debate, right? He signed that letter with me. I phoned him and I said, and I thought I'd get celebrities. I thought he would be the first of many celebrities I'd get. He was the only one, and he hasn't worked in 5 years. He hasn't worked in 5 years because he signed a letter saying, please, let's have a less toxic debate, you know? So I understand the dangers, but there are people like Kathy Burke who's in Gimme, Gimme, Gimme with him, and she should be speaking up for him. You know, she's in a position where she can say these things. She can defend her friend. Again, another colleague who's being treated terribly, who's lost his livelihood, and total silence from their colleagues. It's just extraordinary to me, you know. There's other ones like Frankie Boyle, great truth teller Frankie Boyle, Stuart Lee. None of these guys would make a single joke about trans issues because they're cowards. And the mob has come to power and they serve the mob. They're like, I call them jesters in a corrupt court, you know. And when Jerry Sadowitz was banned from Edinburgh for the first time in, you know, he's been doing that for 25 years, something like that. to be banned from Edinburgh and to have none of these people speak up for him and say, you know, like someone like Stuart Lee, who when it's safe, Stuart Lee will write, you know, big think piece about how great Jerry Sadowitz is, but when the mob comes from, Stuart Lee just looks the other way, you know. So I'm disgusted by the bigger name comedians who haven't spoken out about that. Yeah.
I was going to say Frankie Boyle. I knew him when I was in my teens. Mock the Week was going, and I'd say it was in its prime. In my opinion, it got a bit. After a while, it's kind of, it wasn't that funny. But like when Frankie Boyle was kind of at his peak, as I see it, Jesus, he was the fella who would say anything. There was nothing, no joke he wouldn't make, no topic he wouldn't touch.
Yeah.
God,
well,
it's crazy to see.
I often point out that the one group of people that he is frightened of offending are straight white men, you know, because many trans-identified men are straight and are calling themselves lesbians. And the one group that he won't touch are straight white men. I think that's just abject cowardice, you know.
Sorry, as in he's afraid to insult straight
He
white
won't do
guys?
he won't do trans material. He won't do trans material. And he criticizes people who do, you know, because he's another one of these people who has this shimmering vision of the perfect trans person, you know, who's based on maybe someone he's met at his gig or something like that, but has, you know, but they go completely blind when you talk about the problems in the community, the violent rhetoric, the actual threats. Like Posey Parker had a death threat put under her hotel room door when she was in New Zealand, you know, like the fact that someone like Frankie Boyle will, you know, will launch into the Tories for, you know, for whatever crime they've committed, yet he won't say a word about people who are threatening women. He's pathetic in my view. He should hand in his comedy card.
Really, really. Okay, so in our own country, there's been a few kind of flashes of kind of where the rubber hits the road in terms of trans. There was the Barbie Kardashian case
Yes.
fairly recently, prison. There was that teacher
Still ongoing.
Yeah, there's that teacher Enoch Burke who wouldn't use they them for a student, and then
Yes.
started like showing up at the school and building up fines. I'm not so crazy about that part, but I think
Sure.
I think it's his right to not have to call a student they them if he wants, you know.
But then they found out as well that the school was doing it without the parents' knowledge, you know. Like that was an interesting aspect that I didn't realize. And this is something that we find that we're discovering a lot, is that teachers are being encouraged to keep secrets from parents, you know. That's like one of the basic laws of safeguarding. You do not keep secrets from parents. And now we have these idiot teachers who think that a whole category of child needs to be taken out of normal safeguarding principles, you know. There was a shocking sort of story about a young woman who identified. Oh, was it? It was a young woman who identified as a ma'am, and she was, you know, she was taken away from her parents, and while she was taken away, she was sex trafficked, you know, and they got her back, and the parents wouldn't use the pronouns or whatever like that, and she was taken away again, and it happened again, you know. So you know, I just don't understand what kind of morality thinks that misgendering someone or dead naming them or refusing to accept their boy when they're really a girl, which is basically just sanity. I just don't get why people are pretending that they don't know that these are actually immoral and wrong. Like, you know, people are genuinely now pretending that they don't know that, you know, you don't tell a young kid that they can be born in the wrong body. You just don't do it. It's, you know, and the reason you don't do it is because they're children and they'll believe you, you know. Anyway, sorry, I feel like I might be jumping around the place. Sorry if I am.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Very recently, actually, speaking of that Barbie Kardashian case, Leo Varadkar, for anyone who doesn't know, he's the Taoiseach, which is the Prime Minister of Ireland. he actually did have to answer a question on
Yes, I saw.
it the other day, and to be fair, it's, you know, it shouldn't be seen as like an answer that gets you applause as a politician, but he gave, in my opinion, the reasonable answer, which he said violent biological males shouldn't be sharing a space in prison with females. Do you think even that kind of thing is at least a shift in the right direction?
It's not, well, you know, it's hard to know. I mean, one of the interesting things about this issue is that often people like him, even though he's a gay man, are completely ignorant of what's going on. You know, the way that the debate is framed and the way that the reality of the situation is hidden by journalists and by activists within organizations, it means that no one really has a very clear view of what is going on. So he may have actually said that thinking, yeah, it's obvious. Do you know what I mean? It's obvious you don't put violent men in. But as he may have found out, you know, like I saw people saying that he wasn't really gay because he didn't support trans people, that type of thing, because of saying that statement, you know.
Oh my
So
God.
yeah, so he might have been a bit, I'd say they all might have been a bit shocked by the blowback you get from these lunatics, but it may not come from a position. I'll give you another example. Guy Pearce, the Australian actor, he said something about the appalling abuse of women in Australia and New Zealand. Within 24 hours, he'd written a one-page apology, you know. So people dip their toe in the water, they say what they think is a reasonable thing, and then the threats come in and they get told, oh, you're going to lose this job if you keep saying this, or you're going to, you know. I bet you Guy Pearce had a big film job coming up and they said, you gotta work on this, you know. So, like, you know, again, if there were more people backing him up, more actors who just said, well, why did he apologize? He's right. You know, if there were more people backing me up, like Arthur and Neil Hannon, like, you know, it wouldn't be an issue. But we're all isolated and we're all alone. And as a result, they let us be kind of beaten up in the dark by some of the worst people in the world, you know?
I was going to say, I reckon with comedians and celebrities, when it comes to these issues, I bet you it wouldn't even take like 51% or more of them to agree. It would just, tough to put a figure on it, but I don't know, like it would just kind of take like a few so you get above a threshold where people can say, oh, it's just that one crazy fella Graham, or
Exactly.
it's just that one lunatic. It would just take like 30% or something for it to be seen as kind of okay.
Two or three people to actually stand up and say, hang on, you know, this isn't right, or this is wrong, or what happened to him isn't right, you know. But total silence, you know. I mean, really, like, I've learned a lot about people in the last few years, and you know, luckily my friendship with all these incredibly brave feminists who are going out and risking being attacked by these lunatics, that balances out how disappointed I am in my former friends, you know.
When we look back at this in a couple of decades, do you think by then it'll still be the issue and the debate around it will still be in the state it is? Will it be something we look back on, almost like people do with witching? You look back and you think, Jesus, how the hell did anyone go along with it? Do you think it'll be like that?
Yeah, like trans is basically the bell bottoms of 2023. You know, and people saying things like cis, that's going to be like people saying groovy and things like that in a few years. It's not going to last. The only wild card is that AI is becoming so powerful that we don't actually know what the world is going to look like in another 10 years. It may look even worse in a crazy way. But I do think that if things proceed as they normally would, yeah, it's untenable. It's untenable because, you know, the first time Ireland might go, oh, we haven't had, you know, we have self-ID and we haven't had any problems. But the first time Barbie Kardashian or a Barbie Kardashian in the outside world strikes, then they're going to use that victim of that person to say, oh, maybe we should rethink. And what I find really insulting and annoying about this is that woman does not have to go through that unnecessarily, because we know that single sex spaces are important for women, but they're still putting that future woman in danger with self-ID. So I do think there is going to be an incident. I'm hoping that it won't take an incident. I'm hoping that something will happen before that. Like we need brave people. We need brave people to stand up in the Dáil and to stand up to their friends and to their children, because I think a lot of people are being influenced by their children in this matter, and say, hang on a second, we have to talk about this. It's an extremely consequential series of changes you're suggesting to how we view society, how we view the sexes. We need to talk about it. We need to make sure we're all on the same page so we can move forward. If that doesn't happen, I genuinely think we're going to descend into pure chaos. You know, I said it once. I said it to the House of Lords. I was asked to speak to the House of Lords, and I said something like a world that doesn't know how to define the word woman is a world on the brink of chaos. You know, and it really is, because if we cannot agree on basic aspects of reality, the building blocks of reality, which one would say the word woman is a key building block, then how will we be able to do anything? We won't be able to agree on anything, you know. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting few years.
I wanted to ask you as well if you think that I kind of consider myself like I guess you'd say like a free speech absolutist, especially when it comes to comedy. I really think comedians should be able to kind of push any boundary they want. If you don't want to listen to them, that's fine. Don't click play and don't go to their shows. But you can't be getting comedians shut down and
Yeah.
or pressuring places to not have them. So yeah, do you think that there is kind of any subjects, be it like people's religion, culture, or so on, that's like above comedy? I personally don't, but
No, I mean, you know, people talk about, there was one joke that Frankie Boyle made about Katie Price's son. He said something like she'd have to fight
I
him over.
remember.
Yeah, someone fucking
What he said was she was involved in a custody battle with
yeah.
I think it's Dwight York, and they
Yes.
said, oh yeah, no, there's a custody battle going on at the moment between Katie Price and Dwight York over their special needs son. I mean,
Yeah.
eventually someone's going to have to keep him. That was a joke.
From fucking her, he said, I think. You know, so you know, my problem with a joke like that is that it's not funny. It depends entirely for its power on the unsayableness of it, but there's no kind of humor behind it. However, I do think it's important comedians are allowed to experiment and to play and to maybe wander into an area where they make a mistake or they do a joke that's not quite right or whatever it happens to be, and the audience responds by groaning or whatever they do, and he comes back, he wins them back. That's an important part of the process. And it's also important because there's a level of experimental play in creativity that you know, it requires absolute freedom, and you know, like there's a very good example. I'll give you a very good example. The Friends writers' room. Apparently, they would always be making jokes, really tasteless jokes, including about things like Courtney Cox's inability to have a baby. You know, so they would be like savage amongst each other, and then what they would do, according to the showrunners, is they would find something that was really, really unpleasant or bad or wrong or whatever it happened to be, and they would see how they could use it, because it made them laugh so much. They knew there was something in there, some kind of what's the word, boundary crossing that is the stuff of the best comedy. That is the stuff that really makes comedy work. So they would row it back from the original disgraceful, disgusting thing they said, and find the joke. Now, the reason that we know this about all that is that they were sued. Friends was sued by a woman who was the script editor, who was writing down these jokes, and she sued them, saying that the jokes hurt her or offended her or whatever. Again, it's such an like one can have sympathy for someone like Courtney Cox, but also have sympathy for the privacy of a writer's room where people are just kind of shocking each other and being, right, as well as that the team on Friends, through necessity, had to be very young, because they realized that the comedy would be freshest if it was a young team, And so that's the age where people don't really think about consequences. I was like that. I used to be kind of saying things to push buttons and stuff like that. It's a good age to be a comedy writer for that reason. But if you give anyone any indication that something they say will be used against them in the court of public opinion at some time, then what you have is a chilling effect. That's the end of free speech.
Right. It kills creativity dead
Yes.
if there's only like certain train tracks that you can think along.
Exactly, which is also why I think the kind of enforced diversity casting is also dangerous, because it's the cart leading the horse. We had natural diversity in not Father Ted, in IT Crowd and in Count Arthur, because it suited the story. But if someone had been coming in saying, "Oh, you need a character from the Caribbean or something like that," that's not good. That's not good. That's political fashion wagging the tail. That's the tail wagging the dog. So it's just, creativity is another thing that I think that basically what we all did, which was possibly a huge mistake, was we all put an ability for people. We put a comment section under our lives. So now we live our lives, and people can come, and there's always going to be one little box where they can write, "This guy is an arsehole," underneath it. And it changes how you navigate life. It changes how you see, how you pass through life. Some people like me, even though it's obviously not doing great for my income, ignore all these rules and just kind of barrel through them. But a lot of people don't have the confidence to do that, and as a result, they're going to live a kind of a half life, a life under siege, a life like you might have lived under the Stasi, or during the Second World War, when you had to watch what you said when you were in public. That's what it will be like. It will be like, we'll and then you have Alexa. This is a whole other conversation, but I'm always astonished by people who put Alexa in their houses, because it's like, why would you put a listening device in your home? You might as well just shout abuse out the street. It's like, the idea that you cannot be in your own home on your own and comfortably and confidently say the unsayable is really, really worrying.
I think in Scotland, I'm not 1,000% sure, but I think in Scotland they passed a law that says that if you said something in the privacy of your own home and it's deemed to be like hate speech, which is the most subjective, vague term of all time, that if you say something in the privacy of your own home, that could be deemed that, and you could be possibly arrested and arrested.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's interesting. Yeah.
It's
But
crazy.
but it's kind of unnecessary. It's kind of unnecessary because, like, if you do say something in the privacy of your own home and it somehow gets out there, you're going to be, the court of public opinion is going to put you in the dock. So, everybody has become their own. We've all become our own jailers. We've all become our own guards, and the mob coming to power, which is, I think, what has happened. The mob has come to power. They don't They don't have power over everything. They don't have the power, for instance, over economic matters, over things like farming, but they do have a power over education. They have power over the culture, and the result
The
is,
entertainment media,
yeah,
which shapes culture, like you said.
yeah, yeah, and they're flexing it as viciously as they can. You know, they're a lot of people are having their lives turned upside down because of these intolerant, authoritarian misogynists who hate free speech, you know. So yeah, it's an interesting time to be alive, isn't it?
Most certainly, yeah. I was going to ask you, on that note, if Father Ted was made today, if you were writing it today, I think you would almost be remiss as a comedy writer if you didn't include like a trans episode or a trans joke, or
Oh yeah,
just
yeah,
so sorry, it's just so open. It's just so open to comedy. You know, you would almost be like intentionally looking away if you
yeah.
wrote an episode that there wasn't. Do you think if you wrote it today there would be there'd be a few jokes?
Well, that's the thing. I'm not. I know this is a headline you see all the time from people, so it's a cliche to say it, but there is no way that Father Ted would be written today. When I handed in a sitcom to Hattrick, they gave it to a sensitivity reader. I'd never had that before. You know,
Back in the 90s.
no, this was recently. This was recently. I handed
Sorry,
them
I thought you
in.
meant the 90s.
This is when Hattrick were managing me and just pretending that they were just kind of keeping control over me, and they got me to write a sitcom episode, and I wrote it, and it was about cancellation, and they gave it to a sensitivity reader. It's like, what? This is about cancellation. How on earth will this survive going through a sensitivity reader? You know. And at one point they said something like, because the diversity and inclusion training, I made a joke about it, and the note back was, people might think you don't think diversity and inclusion training is good.
Yeah, bingo.
You know what I mean? Yeah, bingo. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to make it now. And there is a good joke in the TED musical about the whole thing. Because yeah, it's like it's set in the like it's hard to explain how we've done the TED musical. We've done some kind of interesting tricks to make it all make sense, you know. But it's set like today, if that makes sense. Ted and Dougal are still the same age, but it's set today, which gets some comment in the musical. It's all very funny. But yeah, you couldn't. How on earth could you write about today without writing about the fact that there's people who don't believe that men and women or people who don't believe that there's only two sexes, or people that
Or
don't, yeah.
or if you ask, there was that documentary that kind of went a bit viral. If you literally ask people at a women's march to define the word woman, they'll turn into a kind of
Yeah,
bumbling, stuttering.
yeah.
They'll go on like a 5-minute answer, but give you no answer. That
And
that
and
itself is like life being a comedy show. Like,
yeah, exactly. Well, people often say, "Will you ever write about this?" And I say, "Yeah, I might do." But the thing that needs to come first is a documentary. Like, you really need to just put a camera on the madness and show it to people in 1 hour or 2 hour long thing. Like, you could get like literally about 20 minutes of politicians unable to answer what a woman is. You know, you can't get crazier than that. But I would say, if I was writing a comedy right now, yeah, I'd be talking about. I'd definitely be talking about it, because it's the elephant in the room. And just as the in Ireland, the Catholic Church was the elephant in the room when we were doing Father Ted, you know. But it's interesting how many of my colleagues are deciding to ignore it, you know.
right. That attitude of kind of being offended by everything and being very sensitive about this, and about kind of if someone makes a joke that you don't like, you kind of go to the teacher, be
Yeah,
it the teacher or be it a
yeah,
college
you're the
administrator or
boss.
something like that.
Yeah,
Growing up, growing up, I was born in '93. but like even then, that kind of attitude, if there was a kid in the class or a kid in the group who had that attitude, it would be like toxic. It would be considered like repellent. You wouldn't want to, you'd never want to be that kid, and you'd never want to go near them. It was
Yeah.
like a very kind of weak energy, you know. I always saw it. I
You
always
see,
saw it
those
as
kids
kind of
have,
like an American thing, like being offended by everything and thinking everything's inappropriate. Sorry, go
yeah,
on.
yeah. Well, you see, the thing is that those kids, as you say, those kids were you know, they wouldn't be the most popular kids, but now those kids are online and they're able to coordinate with other kids like them, and they're able to create a kind of false consensus around an issue that something is offensive or that something is evil. And that's the kind of problem, you know. I always say that the trans movement is a huge push by what you might call the bully class, like a class of people who missed school, who only really did well at school because they were throwing their weight around like they were in a prison yard. And now they're out, and as soon as they got out of school, they lost their ability to deal with life because suddenly they couldn't intimidate people. Suddenly they couldn't, you know, they didn't have any of the skills they needed. This movement gives their limited skill set a moment in the sun. I compare it, you know, I sometimes compare it to the village bully who sees the despised village bully who sees the Nazi tanks rolling in and says, things are going to be different now, you know. That's what it's like. You've basically given the baton and the badge to some of the worst people online, you know. And they're using it. They're using it as much as they can. They're destroying lives. You know, my friend Rosie Kay, who is a dancer who lost her own dance company, the one that had her name on it. You know, they're still trying to. She's putting on shows, but they're still trying to. They're block booking tickets and not going, and they're telling dancers not to work with them and theaters not to put them on. You know, the bully class is coming to the ascend is having a moment. The bully class is having a moment, and the reason that we can't see it is because, unlike the Nazis, they're not wearing uniforms. You know, they're just kind of, you know, they're friends and neighbors. They're all over the place. Everyone knows someone like that. Everyone knows someone who, if they started talking about trans issues, that person would absolutely tell others not to speak to them and all that sort of stuff, you know. So you know, these little Hitlers have just suddenly, through the internet, found a way to do what your friend at school couldn't do and just police those people around them, you know.
Very good. I appreciate you sharing everything. I'll let you go there in a bit. Is there anything?
Okay.
Is there anything? Anything you'd like to leave us with? Kind of any parting words?
Yeah, yes, I would. I really, I may be able to make it, but I think on the 16th of April or the 14th, might be the 14th, Posey Parker is coming over to Dublin, and she's already been threatened by people like Panty Bliss. And I'm just wondering if anyone likes Father Ted, if anyone appreciates what I'm doing, please go out and stand with Posey at that event, because the more numbers there are on her side, the less likely it is there will be violence like we saw in New Zealand. A few more, especially men. If you're a man, you know, please try and come. Please try and help the women speak. And yeah, I might see you there.
I unfortunately, I am actually going to Dublin. I'll be landing there. I'm visiting home, but it'll be the next week. I would show up and see her otherwise. Can I just ask you what is her? Is there something in particular she's protesting or?
No, she just does these events where it's called Let Women Speak, and she sets up a little microphone camera, and she asks people to put up their hand, and they come out and they just read what they have to say to the camera. And doing that has led to, you know, she's had soup poured over her, old women have been beaten up at her things. It's just extraordinary. She drives people nuts, and all she's doing is letting women speak.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much for your time.
Not at all. It was a pleasure. Thank you for the great questions. I really enjoyed that.
Of course, no, geez, I appreciate it, bye.